Perhaps you've heard Winter Promise integrates the best of all homeschool approaches into one curriculum. If you've heard that, you may wonder, well, how do the strengths of these different approaches offset the weaknesses of others? How does that work exactly? Well, we're going to be talking through that in this video. One of the things that we want to start with are the different approaches, the major approaches that Winter Promise integrates into our curriculum. Those would be the literature approach, the classical approach, traditional schooling methods, hands-on learning like kinesthetic activities, Charlotte Mason ideals, and then kind of those bells and whistles products that make schooling kind of have a little zip. So we integrate all of those learning avenues, those major homeschool approaches, and I want to kind of explain how we use them and also how the way we use them actually helps you eliminate the downsides of any one of those approaches. Most any curriculum you find out there is going to major on one of these homeschool approaches. You're probably familiar with a lot of major homeschooling companies, and usually they call themselves either the literature approach or the classical approach or maybe hands-on kinesthetic learning. Well, here at Winter Promise we integrate all of these. We have a heavy emphasis in Charlotte Mason ideals, but we do integrate the best of what is being offered by the literature approach, the classical approach, and these other approaches. So let's start with the literature approach and how Winter Promise integrates that. Winter Promise is really based around the idea of reading great books. Not only is that concept embraced by the literature approach, but Charlotte Mason advocated that as well, so it's a major part of our Winter Promise program. The strengths of literature as an approach is that the student gets to read great literature, it inspires students, and really gives them a good sense of time and place in other times throughout history and other geographical locations around the world. It gives you a sense of maybe how middle-aged cities might have smelled or sounded. So it really takes the student there and gives them a real sense of what people were thinking or feeling or going through in a certain place and time in history. The weakness of the literature approach, however, is often cited as being that students don't really learn hard facts. In other words, they're reading a lot of great books, but can they tell you actually when Christopher Columbus crossed the ocean, or say how many states Lewis and Clark went through? It's kind of a problem. So that weakness is something that Winter Promise strives to overcome. Well, how do we do that? We link the literature approach up with another part of our learning activities, which are the bells and whistles resource. Now we're going to show you here a graphic that's going to help illustrate how this kind of functions. Winter Promise integrates the best of all homeschool approaches like the spokes of a wheel, and if you see there the literature approach on the top left, you'll see that directly opposite it is the bells and whistles that Winter Promise offers. These bells and whistles really add to the literature approach, and one in particular helps overcome the weakness that we just talked about, that students may not come out learning a whole lot of hard facts in the literature approach. Winter Promise, one of the bells and whistles resources that we include is actually timeline cards in our guides. Any history-based guide will have 100 dates and events that the student is actually learning and reinforcing throughout the year. These cards have on the front an event and on the back a date and the importance of that date. So that not only are they learning about the event and when it happened, but they're learning the relevant reasons as to why that event impacted human history and what the outcome of that was. So that's a way that students actually who are learning through the literature approach here at Winter Promise actually are getting those hard dates and all of that hard learning so that they can actually access those facts and statistics and the things that you really need to know in your head that you can just pull up. Well, bells and whistles is a lot more than just timeline cards, however. Our bells and whistles that we offer add a lot of fun, which also offsets some of the other parts of the wheel, the other approaches. Some of our other bells and whistles resources include our journaling and notebooking. We have really intriguing resources that are different from what you might find other companies, like our notebooking on sea monsters or our pirate pack. These kinds of fun resources that are high interest kind of add that cherry on top of the sundae for the student, and they allow students to delve into topics that really, really motivate them to keep learning. And if you're studying pirates, that's certainly a part of the time in history, and it's a way that kids can learn even more about how trade of the time figured into why piracy flourished and why the politics of the time helped pirates get away with the loot they wanted. So all those bells and whistles resources that we offer, and you'll find them sprinkled throughout the curriculum, actually are there to help students learn and keep motivating them too. So the bells and whistles resources, which you'll see on the bottom right of the graphic, those actually help engage all the learning styles. Some of the weaknesses of bells and whistles might be that they lack educational value, but that is not true with a Winter Promise bell and whistle. We make sure that the resources we offer always are targeted to have educational outcome. They're not just busy work. They're not just color this or draw that or think about this or do a report on why there's rocks in your driveway. It's all stuff that really has a driving point of education. We wouldn't include anything that really doesn't aim to add to your educational experience. So whereas you could get maybe a bells and whistle resource down at your local teaching store, not all of those are designed to have educational value. Some of them are designed, honestly, to keep students quiet so that the teacher can pay attention to the students who really need help in traditional classrooms. They're not there to really, really benefit the student as much as the teacher. And so therefore, Winter Promise is built around that aspect of reaching out educationally to students. Let's take a look at the next part of our graphic. Over on the left, you'll see the classical approach. The classical approach is very popular with homeschoolers. I think a lot of new homeschoolers feel very comfortable with the classical approach because it is highly structured. And that structure can be a sense of security that you're doing all the right things for your student. And it's a highly scholastically driven approach. What I mean by that is that there are very scholastic reasons and traditional reasons for why the classical approach is structured the way it is. It's all based on Greek philosophy of learning around the grammar stage, the didactic stage, the rhetoric stage. All of these are together built into the classical approach, which very much organizes the learning, gives new parents, parents new to homeschooling, a sense that, wow, they really know they're kind of hitting everything and they're really sure that there's a lot of educational value here because it's so scholastic. The problem is, and I would call this a weakness of the classical approach, is that it can be very dull and boring, and it really is so overstructured that it treats all students the same. The classical approach very much connects with students who are traditional students, the students who would succeed at any approach. Let's be frank, the kids who sit well in traditional school and love to get buried in a book, these students would perform well almost no matter what you did with them because they're born to be good students. They're just, that's the way their mind works. And if you listen to our multiple learning intelligences entry in this series, that might help you kind of understand why I say that these students would probably succeed with anything. This approach is built for those students, but unfortunately, not every student is built for this approach. And that's where you run into difficulties with students who just cannot connect with this learning approach. It's too structured. It relies too heavily on a student who's willing to do in-depth and philosophical work and do things around a very rigid, preset up format. So for those reasons, there's many learners who just don't thrive inside of a classical approach.